Hi, my name is Zach Smith, and today I will be talking about the Equifax data breach. In early March of 2017, a cybersecurity arm of U.S. Homeland Security disclosed a vulnerability in the Apache Struts program. This program is used to help manage large-scale websites for governments, startups, and large countries. Fast forward roughly 4 months. On July 29 of 2017, Equifax, a popular credit reporting agency, discovered that their systems had been compromised. It comes to their attention that the vulnerability used in the attack was the Apache Struts flaw released months prior. They must have debated on how to deal with this problem because it took them 6 weeks until they finally reported the breach to authorities. Their official statement, released on September 7, said 143 million people had been affected. This number had climbed to 148 million by March of 2018. Multiple company executives traded their shares before the announcement of the hack, and 2 employees were eventually convicted of insider trading. However, worst of all is probably their CSO, Susan Mulder. She was hired into a technological role with no background in the subject and a degree in music composition. The first ethical issue in this case is how the company knew of the flaw but failed to do anything to protect themselves. This is highly unethical as it endangers their many customers' data. From a utilitarian perspective, this act would be deemed unethical because they did so knowing the consequences of the potential compromise of customer data. There was no benefit to be gained from not patching the vulnerability, so it should have been patched as soon as possible. From a deontological perspective, this act would be considered unethical as well because the executives did not properly perform their duties. Susan Mulder's duty was to protect the customer's data, but she failed to do so, making the acts that led up to the breach unethical, and she resigned due to it. From a virtuous perspective, this act was wrong. A virtuous person would have patched the vulnerability as soon as possible, knowing that doing so would protect the customer's data. By not doing so, the company's actions were not ethical and definitely not virtuous. The fact that the company delayed their reporting of the breach for so long seems unethical at first glance, but I think it depends on how you look at it. If you come at this issue from a utilitarian perspective, the act of delaying the announcement may be deemed ethical if done to help them provide relevant information immediately to minimize panic among their customers. However, if they delay the announcement in fear, it would be deemed unethical. From a deontological perspective, this is unethical. The law states that you must report all relevant breaches within 72 hours of becoming aware of them. Equifax failed to do just that, and in doing so, they broke the law. This makes it unethical from a deontological perspective. From virtue ethics perspective, not telling the customer about the breach immediately is unethical. The company should have been as transparent as possible throughout the process, and it could have gone much smoother if they did. But the company took 6 entire weeks to disclose the information. With that long of a gap in this series of breach, their actions were highly unethical. Before the executives announced the breach, a few of them thought it would be okay if they sold off their shares to protect their portfolio. 3 executives sold a total of $2 million worth of shares, and eventually the CIO and a company software developer were convicted of insider trading. From a utilitarian perspective, it makes sense in the short term, but in the long term, the consequences are not worth it, because selling off their shares means that whoever bought said shares suffered a loss. They suffered the same loss that he would have, so it is not for the greater good. This action would be deemed unethical from a utilitarian perspective. From a deontological perspective, insider trading is obviously wrong. It states in the law, our written rule, that insider trading is illegal. Deontological, being all about rules and duties, would deem any act in violation of this rule unethical. Therefore, the company's actions are also unethical from a deontological perspective. Through using virtue ethics, these acts would also be deemed unethical. Insider information provides an unfair advantage to those who possess it. This makes any stock trade with an insider information involved very unbalanced and unethical. The last issue that I will discuss is the hiring of Susan Mulder as CSO. Susan Mulder has a master's in music composition and absolutely no relevant technical background prior to working at Equifax as CSO. To me, it seems she is unqualified for the position and could be a key reason to the breach in the first place. A responsible CSO would have had that vulnerability patched and fixed long before the breach was even attempted. From a utilitarian perspective, this is clearly unethical. The company knew that Mulder did not have a technical background, but still hired her into the role responsible for securing all their customers' data. This obviously will have had bad consequences for both the company and customers, and thus is unethical. From a deontological perspective, the company did nothing wrong. There is no regulation in who they can hire as a CSO, so no rules were broken in hiring her. Therefore, from a deontological perspective, the act of hiring Mulder is ethical. The virtue ethics position would claim that the executive should have known that she was not a good hire. Hiring her was an obvious risk to the company and would do more bad than good. Because of this, it is deemed unethical. This was a legal and ethical analysis of the Equifax data breach. Thanks for listening.